When it comes to web app and API security, the choice is simple. You can choose Fastly's security solution that teams will actually use in full blocking mode, just like 90% of their customers. Or you can stick with costly options that you probably just turn off. You can get Fastly's all-in-one platform that protects apps everywhere they live, however they're built. Or departments can agree to disagree. You can go to securityweekly.com/Fastly to learn more. Or you can just wish you had. Stopping advanced threats requires knowing exactly what you're up against. ExtraHop Reveal X is the only solution that shows you not just where intruders are going, but where they've been. 90-day look back and complete network visibility across the data center, cloud, and device edge helps security teams respond 84% faster with ExtraHop Reveal X network detection and response. Explore the interactive demo at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. Wide-scale adoption of cloud applications, an increase in remote workers, and expansion of branch offices has rendered the centralized, on-premises security model impractical. Enter Cisco Umbrella. Umbrella now includes secure web gateway, firewall, and cloud access security broker functionality, plus integration with Cisco SD-WAN, all delivered from a single cloud security service. It helps businesses of all sizes secure their network and extend protection to roaming users and branch offices. Security doesn't have to be complicated. Get simple, smart, and powerful security with Cisco Umbrella. Visit securityweekly.com/Cisco Umbrella to learn more.
Welcome back to RSA Conference 2021, live from Virtual Broadcast Alley. It's our last interview, but not the least. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this segment is Kevin Gallagher. He's the Chief Revenue Officer at NetSparker by Invicti. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Glad to be here.
Now, we're going to talk about how to build and maintain a resilient web app security program. But I think first, it helps to kind of set a little background. NetSparker, Acunetics, all part of now what's called Invicti Security.
Invicti Security.
Yep, exactly. I remember a year ago us talking about some of the branding discussions about how do you do the brands. I thought you did a really excellent job, by the way, of using Invicti as an umbrella and keeping the NetSparker and Acunetics brands in place, and I thought you and the team did a really good job with that.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. Yeah, and we obviously a lot of folks understand and know NetSparker. A lot of people have been following and utilizing Acunetics, and we didn't want to lose those brands. But what we wanted to do was bring the best of both worlds together and create a Invicti Security that's going to be able to provide the best web application security platform that we can, combining all the scalability and proof-based scanning together with fast, quick security scanning, and it's been great for us. It's really been our mission to really transform the way web apps are secured, and I think we're doing that with Invicti. Yeah,
so let's get into that a little bit, right? So we did a segment on your indicator report, right? The Invicti indicator. I can't remember the exact name, but you guys measure and have measured for the last few years kind of critical vulnerabilities in the space. And in the way I refer to it is 2020 was the lost year, right? We didn't make progress. We saw a lot of stuff kind of flatline in making improvements in our web app security. We saw critical vulnerabilities tick up a little bit last year because I think we lost focus a little bit around the pandemic and the move to remote work and all this other stuff. And the security teams had a lot of other things on their plates of getting VPNs up and running and figuring out how to get remote workers connected. So we lost a year on progress on the application security space. And so when we think about either restarting our program or actually focusing on our web app program, what are the things we need to think about on how do we approach web app security?
Absolutely. And, we really have put together a really comprehensive, life cycle around, how to manage vulnerabilities. And it's really kind of almost like a 5-step approach. And we can walk through this approach and please interrupt me as we're going through it and ask questions to get deeper into it. But, what we've seen is in all this experience that we've had coming to RSAs and having conversations with our customers is that we have customers that just do not know, especially in today's environment, how many web apps they actually have. So the first step that we've put together in this is really let's go out and discover and figure out how many web applications you have in your environment. So let's go out there and take a look, see what's those publicly facing web applications. We're going to go out and scan for those, and then really allow you to say, okay, here's the set of web apps I have, and now let me take a look at these and try and figure out what are my most critical all the way down to the least critical, so that we can start to at least build that baseline of how we're going to attack this problem around vulnerabilities in web apps.
Yeah, so I want to CIS control number 2, inventory your software, right? And I mean, web apps are software at the end of the day. And yes, there are also physical components that make up those web applications, which is CIS, but number 1, right?
Sure.
This has been a challenge for organizations for a long time. When I was at Tenable, when Paul and I were doing the research in the web app security space, we were starting to think about this problem like, wait, who's doing the discovery? Like, if a customer gives me their web apps, is that all of them? I mean, how do you think about kind of automated, continuous discovery of your web properties? Because as we saw in the pandemic, Kevin, we saw a proliferation of new sites, new web apps coming up to support the remote worker, to support move to the cloud, to support the consumer engagement. An organization that's trying to do this manually has to be behind the curve.
Absolutely. It is a massive challenge to understand and know. I mean, when you look at a quick example, marketing department puts up a website for a fundraising event that they're going to do. So let's say we're going to sign up for a marathon and do a fundraiser. How do you know if that ever came down again? Is it still out there and and never been looked at, maintained, or taken down? And how many of those do you have in your organization that you have no idea that are still sitting out there? So that's really the importance of the discovery is first to just really understand and know how many apps do I actually really have.
Yeah, and the second part of that then is the ability to classify criticality, another major gap in just like basic cyber hygiene, right? We talked about this for years when I was at Qualys, Tenable, elsewhere. Asset identification is tough, but then asset classification is even harder. What have you guys done to really help make it easier to really identify or help classify the criticality of these different applications?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things first is, like I said, is understanding and knowing. The second is looking at what is on, like what are those web apps supporting and servicing? And it's not just the web apps; it's the web services, APIs. Does it contain PII? Is it a HIPAA related? Is it a financial related app? And making sure that those are the ones that we want to address first. And as we go through and start to really identify those types of applications, we really want to now say, okay, we need to take care of this first, but at the same time, we don't want to ignore everything else, right? And that's been the way web application security has been for a very long time. It's, okay, we're just going to address our most critical apps, and that's it, because that's all we have the time for. We're making it so that you can address your critical apps and everything else all in a very timely manner.
Okay, so let's talk about step 2, which has to be some level of scanning detection for vulnerabilities. And maybe where we get into the criticality a little bit is the frequency at which we test, right? But walk us through kind of how you guys have laid out step number 2 in the process.
Absolutely. So step 2, I mean, the obvious thing is you're going to scan, your web apps. Whether you're using a current tool or you're using a pen testing company, but you want to be able to go out and now scan using a high quality tool, do some configuration, some authentication, get the better the tool, the less configuration you're going to need. So now you're doing that, and you're going out and within 24 hours, 48 hours, you're going to start getting results, right? So great, we've gone out, we've scanned, but the problem is now, let's say you have 1,000 websites, you might be looking at 8,000, 10,000 issues of various levels, from critical, high critical, middle, medium to low. What are we supposed to do with all these? How are we? The biggest challenge right now is we just don't know what to do. We have 10,000 issues. We have 5 people to deal with them. Where do we even start?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's where prioritization, right, comes into play, is how do you understand context based on the vulnerability, based on the risk, based on the based on the exploitability, right? Kind of the threat vulnerability management models from a web app perspective to say we believe these types of vulnerabilities have the highest risk, and maybe these are the ones we should focus on first. So prioritization is a big part of interpreting the results.
It is, and that's kind of step number 3 in this is really facilitating the remediation of these vulnerabilities. Now, even before you get to the prioritization, what ends up happening in most organizations, and depending on the scanner that they're using, is you got these 10,000 vulnerabilities. How do you know if they're real or not? Because the number of false positives is astronomical in a lot of tools. So you need to be utilizing technology that can automatically prove and triage these vulnerabilities, so that you have a true list of how many vulnerabilities you actually now need to go and remediate.
Do you do that as part of the actual scan, or is that a follow-up to the initial scan? Are you doing the validation against false positives and knowing exactly which ones are vulnerable because you've proved it as part of the scan, or is that a secondary step?
As part of the scan.
Okay.
So as part of the scan, we are utilizing our proprietary proof-based scanning technology so that developers can automatically confirm issues, and they get proof that issue is true. And so it's like an extracted database detail against that vulnerability.
So that helps maybe take what normally would be 10,000 vulnerabilities in another tool, maybe down to a couple thousand that are actually real, right? Do you know
correct.
what that kind of normal kind of drop in the when you weed out false positives, is it 50% improvement, 80%?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, somewhere in that range. 50 to 80% improvement in terms of true vulnerabilities that you need to say, hey, we really need to take care of these now.
Okay, so I got those. I've done some prioritization. Now somebody has to go fix it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's where we recommend it, integrating into development. And what we're doing at this level is, okay, we had 10,000. Let's say we've narrowed that down to 5,000, and we have severity of medium, high that needs to be fixed, and we know that these are direct impact vulnerabilities. So what we want to be able to do is automatically create a ticket in the developer's existing issue tracker, so that is part of their daily workflow. So this is no longer saying, okay, we're going to take all these vulnerabilities, we're going to put them into a spreadsheet, and then we're going to turn it into a PDF, and then we're going to email it around, and then we're going to hope that the developers take a look at it and fix it. The problem with that has been, the developers will get this report and they're going to be like, this is, you're crying wolf again. We can't have all these. There's so many false positives. But when we can actually say, yes, this is a vulnerability, it's been proven, it is one that has direct impact, we want to then be able to go in and create a ticket right into the developer's workflow. Then they can pick that up, fix that vulnerability as part of their daily routine, not as something that's a subset of what they're trying to do, but as a part of their daily routine.
Yeah, I mean, I've known for years that the developers are never going to log into a security tool. They have their tool sets in front of them. And so we've seen this shift, and you guys have been on the cusp of this as well, is how do I take those results and integrate them into the tool sets? This is the real kind of vision around DevSecOps to me, is that these tools are integrated and the data is in the right place, because there's two use cases that have to be solved here. There's a development use case around fixing these and making sure their code is more secure. There's a security use case. And so, yeah, maybe the security team will log in to a security tool to monitor progress, et cetera. But for the developers to fix it, you got to put it where they are. Otherwise, they're just there's no visibility there for them.
Oh, absolutely. So it's the two parts of it, right? You're 100% correct, Matt, that the visibility is huge, but also making sure that we're giving them accurate information that they can do something with. And through the automation, what it does is it just cuts out all of the back and forth. It cuts out all of the, I don't believe yous. It cuts out, I didn't get the emails, right? It is all automated and working in the sense that you're getting actual real data that's proven that you need to fix, and it's being fixed in the way that you like to work.
Yeah, and the best example, I saw this when I was at Layered Insight. We had a meeting. We were meeting with a customer. They were a prospect. They ended up being a customer. And I remember them telling us, yes, daily we sit down with the security and DevOps teams, and we have this list, and every day we're debating which ones we're going to fix, which ones we're not going to fix. That's just a waste of time, right? I mean, to automate this is a much more efficient process.
Oh, absolutely. And take this back to the beginning. So we said, all right, you got 10,000, vulnerabilities. That's impossible in the way that you just described. You'll never get through those 10,000.
Yeah, definitely not. Step number 4, scheduling continuous integration, which means this is a closed loop process. And I think this is the other important part here. Continuous monitoring, continuous testing is now critical, primarily because I always go back to my vuln management days. If I could get a company to scan their entire network once a month or once a quarter, we were happy. In the application world, stuff is changing daily or multiple times a day, which means you've got to be more real time. Otherwise, you can't keep up with these code pushes.
Yeah, absolutely. And what one of the really cool things that we're doing is actually integrating into the Devops pipeline as well. So I told you on the outside part, where we scanned everything that we found externally. And we're giving you, true accuracy on the number of vulnerabilities that you have, and we're passing that to the developer. We can also take it from the other side and say, okay, as part of the DevOps pipeline, as you're building a web application, if you introduce a vulnerability, we are scanning and we are telling you that you just introduced this vulnerability. The developer can then immediately, again with proof, see that this vulnerability was introduced, fix it. So then we're monitoring prior to web apps going into production.
Yeah.
So now we got both ends covered.
Yeah, and this has been, I think, a challenge for a lot of organizations. We think about pre-production so much with static analysis, software composition analysis. Now you've got IAST, which you guys have built an IAST capability, and I think that's where you're doing it from, right? That's on one side. And maybe you're doing some container scanning and a few other things pre-production. Then it goes into production. You still have to deal with the runtime side. So you guys have done a pretty good job of balancing the runtime with your DAST offering and also leveraging the IAST, I think, on the pre-production side to give that visibility before the code ever gets to production. Therefore, it's one less vulnerability the DAST scanner has to pick up, right?
100%. Right. So, and that's what I talked about in the beginning is this life cycle. So it starts with, hey, we got to secure what's already out in the wild. Like that's the most important thing to us. We got to identify and discover how many assets we actually have. We then have to figure out what is our most critical apps and make sure that those are secure without ignoring everything else. We want to be able to make sure that our developers are fixing those vulnerabilities by making it as easy as possible for them to get the data and understand it and then be able to go in and fix that environment. Then we want to be able to get on the more proactive side, right? So that's kind of all on the reactive side. So now we want to get on the more proactive side. And on the proactive side, we're integrating into DevSecOps. We're in that environment and in that world, and we're making it easier for developers to understand and know that vulnerabilities have been introduced prior to apps going into production.
Yeah, big hurdle, great capabilities. So what's the last step? Step number 5.
Yeah, that's really that whole thing working in sync constantly in your environment. It doesn't end with just one pass through, right? This is a continuous environment. So we're continually scanning what's out in the wild. We're continually scanning what's going on in your environment. And we are setting up, as we go along, we're creating better policies and better groups. And we're making sure that, as new developers come on board, that they get assigned in. And so that, we know where to send vulnerabilities to. So it's just continuing that process so that you can scale to 10,000, 100,000, 1 million, web apps, especially in this environment when you have microservices and you have, containers and so many APIs and so many microservices, right? It become almost impossible to manage without this type of automation. It's really unique and new in this space, right? When you think about it, it's gone from, all right, I'm going to scan as many web apps as I can, and most of the time it's just going to be my most critical ones because that's what I'm concerned about. To, and just getting a report and saying, okay, here it is. Let's go try and triage. Or we might have to bring somebody in, a third party, to help them go through all this stuff manually to try and get through it.
Yeah.
To now having confidence in your web apps. We went from scanning to managing. I think that's the best way I can put it. We went from scanning web apps to managing web apps.
Yeah, but we can't forget about reporting, right? Because we still have to show improvement. We still have to show metrics. We still have to create that compliance report. We still have to get metrics to the executive team and the board. So we can't forget about the reporting piece.
No.
But reporting can't be the mechanism that drives the program. It needs to be an outcome or an output from the program, right?
100% correct. Yes, and that's exactly the approach that we're taking, and that's with our reporting, and being able to make sure that the reports get into the right hands at the right time. Having as we spoke about the last time, the trend matrix report to see our vulnerabilities, how quickly are they being remediated, are they being reintroduced after they've been remediated, all the criticality of the vulnerabilities. Making sure that our vulnerability databases is constantly being updated, so that we're capturing as many vulnerabilities as we possibly can. That all still has to be occurring while you're doing this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great approach. I think it's a very simple approach, and can be a very effective approach. Anything else, Kevin, while I have you here?
I don't think so, Matt. I think that covers what I brought to the table.
Awesome. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us on Security Weekly.
I appreciate it. Have a great one.
You too. If anybody wants to learn more about Invicti, NetSparker, please visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker. With that, this is the last micro interview for Virtual Broadcast Alley, but stay tuned. Paul Security Weekly is coming up this evening.
Welcome, everyone, to our RSA broadcasting from Virtual Broadcast Alley. I'm, of course, Paul Asadorian, here with the fine folks from Fortinet. You can find out more by visiting securityweekly.com/Fortinet. I have here with me today Derek Mankey. He's the Chief Security Insights and Global Threat Alliances at Fortinet's FortiGuard Labs. Derek, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
And Michael Daniel, the President and CEO of the Cyber Threat Alliance. Welcome, Michael.
Yep, thank you for having me.
Nice to have you both here. The topic for today is behind the scenes of the cyber fight, highlighting the defenders, which is, I think, a good break from, we talk a lot about attacks here on the Security Weekly network. So, what does talking about the good defender side, what does that really mean? What can we highlight from the defender side?
Yeah, so great question. It can easily be a complex answer, but I'll try to keep this as simple as possible. So to me, the good is anything that we can do to try to flatten the curve, right, when we're looking at the cybercrime pandemic as it really is, right? Especially if we look at the proliferation of ransomware that's happening and the lion's share of attacks, which is cybercrime. Anything we can do, and on the defender side, different defenders have different views of good, right? And quite frankly, every defender has a piece or a stake in that ecosystem. So it's, even going down to the end user and SMBs and organizations and consumers, having that education piece as an example of being able to hone and sharpen their skills on a daily basis, to be aware of new social engineering lures that are happening. That may seem like a small thing, but collectively, that's a big problem, right? If those skill sets aren't sharpened. So things we're doing in the industry, at Fortinet as an example, we have free education, information, and security awareness training. We have security certifications as an example too. That education piece, I think, is a big is an important thing. I just wanted to highlight. Beyond that, of course, it's everything we can definitely talk about today in terms of work that we've done, frameworks in the industry, technology pieces that we've built. There's the mitigation piece as well, making networks more resilient. And this is us as a security vendor, of course. The more resilient we can make networks, the more expensive it's going to be for cyber criminals to operate. That's a good thing, right? Because it forces them to start to shift tactics and go back to the drawing board. But we can't just stop there. Actually, a good defense is a good offense as well, right? There's certainly offensive measures in terms of takedowns and all these things for botnet operations and ransomware games we can talk about. But the other thing is that by doing these good, strong defensive tactics, it's also really disrupting the cyber criminal supply chain. They have their own supply chain on their end. And so from a good defender standpoint, right, doing these things ethically to be able to stack up the defense, really disrupt their business model. To me, that's collectively what the state of good is on our side.
Helps if I unmute my microphone. And Michael, so you have a long background in the government, and you're now leading the cyber threat analysis team. Did I say that? I said that right. Cyber threat alliance team, I should say. From your perspective, is there information sharing that we can do to kind of dovetail off what Derek was saying, or what's from your view? How do we disrupt the attackers?
Well, sure. So what CTA does is it enables cybersecurity providers to share threat intelligence with each other in both an automated and a human-to-human fashion. And so the theory behind that is that, we've long emphasized information sharing in other industry verticals like financial services or healthcare or the energy sector. Well, the cybersecurity sector needs to be doing the same thing. And if it does that, if it actually works together to share threat intelligence and collaborates in the way that Derek was starting to highlight, then we actually can do a better job of taking the fight to the bad guys. And we can increase that scope, scale, and cadence of our disruption actions so that we have a longer term, more strategic impact on the adversaries. And ultimately, that's what CTA really is trying to enable. We're trying to enable our members to do a better job of protecting their customers and clients, but also taking that fight to the bad guys.
It sounds like it's interesting. In the course of my career, I've run across several different cyber criminals. And if you're just one person and you find one event, no one seems to pay attention. I mean, and this is, almost 20 years ago, that I found some of my first incidents. But if we can come together and there's multiple organizations seeing the same thing, we can share information with each other and share back to law enforcement. Is that kind of the strategy that you two both were highlighting in the beginning of the interview?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Yep. Go ahead, Derek.
So I think we both said yes at the same time because we agree with that. It's true. As a founding member of the CTA, I can tell you firsthand, it's been everything Michael said, right? Getting collectively together, it's a powerful thing, right? On various fronts. There's getting together to share the information to increase our security presence, right? The security stack worldwide. Again, that makes all of our, sharing information on the attackers, that increases that mitigation piece, the resiliency piece. It makes it more expensive for cyber criminals to operate. So there's that, but there's also the collective voice, right? Things we're doing, sharing early trusted information through the Alliance, as an example, is a very powerful thing, so that no one's taken by surprise on our side when we start to release our reports. And if I look back with the CTA about 6 years ago now, right? One of the first projects we worked on was CryptoWall version 3. This was one ransomware threat, which was the prolific ransomware at the time. Again, it wasn't just one vendor getting together. We actually had a collective pool of researchers that got together, shared information, and exposed the elements of that particular ransomware group. And by doing so, it actually it hurt them, right? I mean, the next day we saw a shift. They tried to shift to CryptoWall version 4 model, and they just weren't as successful afterwards as they had been before. So just my point of view. Michael, I don't know what else you want to comment on.
No, I mean, I would say that that's exactly right. I mean, what we're trying to do is encourage those connections between the cybersecurity industry and governments, so that we're having government and the private sector work together to disrupt what the bad guys are doing, because you need both the public and the private sector to be working together on that. And I think we've shown that we can do that. You can see evidence in like the takedown of Emotet and that group's infrastructure earlier this year. But we need to be doing that like every week. And we need to be hitting one of those groups in that way. so that we can really have that kind of strategic impact on the adversary and really begin to reduce, frankly, the amount of money and the benefits that are flowing to being cyber criminals and making life much more difficult for the nation state actors.
Yeah, Michael, I love that. And I love the part where you say prevent them from making as much money. And the earlier in the campaign we can disrupt their activities, the less folks they'll be able to ransomware and therefore not generate enough revenue. Hit them, where it counts, is disrupting their revenue flow. Because ransomware, I mean, is top of mind on everyone today. I mean, it's certainly not a new thing, but it's just really ramped up. What are your thoughts on ransomware today and disrupting it, and also kind of making it so that people don't fall victim to it, but if they do, not paying the ransom, right? Because then we'll just keep that funding going to the attackers.
Yes. So what I would say is that ransomware has changed from being an economic nuisance. From 8 years ago, ransomware primarily affected individual computers, and the ransoms were in hundreds of dollars. Now, ransomware affects whole systems, whole companies, critical infrastructure, like we've seen with the Colonial Pipeline, hospitals, school systems, city governments, anything you can name. And now, effectively, it's a national security and public health and safety threat. And so when you think about it from those terms, that means that the tools that you're going to want to bring to bear against ransomware are now much broader. You have to raise it in its priority for both governments and the private sector to deal with. And I think that it's really, really important that we focus on disrupting that entire ransomware business model from beginning to end at every step of the way. And as you said, so starting from, can we ramp up protections inside companies so they're more resilient to ransomware attacks? How do we actually enable them to respond better to ransomware attacks so that they don't feel compelled to pay, so that they have alternatives to paying? How do we actually identify that ransomware business model and find all the places that we can put pressure on the ransomware gangs? I think one of them is actually in cryptocurrency areas, because cryptocurrency is the fuel that enables the ransomware epidemic to keep going. And we've got to figure out a way to bring some of the principles of anti-money laundering and know your customer and other things that are part of the regular financial services industry into the cryptocurrency world, so we can start to choke off some of those financial flows. But it's really going to take a full court press from all parts of government and all parts of the private sector to deal with this problem, because it is so big and it is so lucrative right now.
Derek, sorry, did you have comments on that front?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously agree with everything Michael says there. In addition to me, if we look at going back to the good, I fully agree. We need to do this almost on a weekly basis because the problem is so big, but we are making good strides in the industry. If you look at, there are a lot of pieces fueling this cryptocurrency platforms, certainly one of them is, as Michael talked about, and the money laundering aspect. But another is the amount of players, right, in these organizations. It's not just, you had mentioned earlier, back 20 years ago, you're looking at one person or one incident, right? Now you have, it's not just handfuls, you can have 50 plus people in these organizations. And then you add the affiliates, right? And the affiliates are the ones that are in the middle, acting on a commission basis, up to 60% plus commission sometimes, and they make lucrative amounts of money as well. So, to me, looking at the good in terms of the disruption efforts, there was an indictment earlier this year with NetWalker, and this was actually going after an affiliate, because a lot of action typically goes after the actual organization itself. But this was sending another message, right, to the affiliates, which are a big problem, the distribution piece, saying, you're not going to get away with this either. And, just that one affiliate, I believe, had made close to $30 million just as an affiliate on commission. So that's a great message to be sending back to the industry. But again, it's only possible by collectively doing this and doing the public-private sector work that Michael was talking about.
I think there's, two different kinds of information sharing, and some is more effective than others. And I feel like there's a lot of organizations, especially here in the U.S., that don't put as much effort into cybersecurity to actually be able to take proactive actions. And I like the information sharing that's like, hey, by the way, like you've got malware on your system and like here's the proof. When I worked at university, we would do this level of sharing. That was always the more actionable ones, like, oh, we got to drop everything. Versus like, hey, there's a group that might be targeting you and here's what they look like. And like, you have to go look. I feel like not every organization is really poised to go look all the time with cybersecurity experts. Is there a push to share information that's basically like you're part of this attack? Are we seeing more of that level of information sharing?
Well, in fact, I would say that, yes. I mean, part of my whole argument is that the sharing, like just sort of generally sharing big streams of indicators or, hashes and URLs and bad domain names and saying, here's a bunch of bad stuff, go figure out if you care about it. Like that's not terribly useful or actionable to most organizations. So as you said, like what we really need to be focused on is what is relevant to the organization that we're sharing it with. And what can they take action on? What do we want them to go do? Because we're not just sharing information for the, sort of sake of saying, ooh, that's going to be really bad when that hits, right? We share it so that people can take action and better protect themselves or go remediate a problem that they already have. And so I think we need to get much more sophisticated in our thinking about information sharing and how we think about which organizations we want to be sharing what kind of information. Because information sharing takes work and it takes commitment. And as you say, a lot of organizations, that's difficult for them to sustain. So we really need to connect it to what their mission is or what their business is and make sure that the information that we're sharing is relevant to them and actionable. And that's where we really have to continue maturing this information sharing discussion.
Yeah, and to me, this is a great piece in the industry, a technology piece that we've actually worked on with the Cyber Threat Alliance as an example too. So with the Magellan platform, it's fully capable of describing not only the attacker, but real-time attacks that we're seeing. So, to me, this is the contextual piece. This is what I call the high resolution model. As Michael was saying, if we just talk about the low resolution model, which is, URLs, IPs, hashes, it only goes so far. But with the high res model, now we can connect that. So we know that there's all these, not just, malware on your system, but we've seen, different types of TTPs, techniques, tactics, procedures, lateral movement, different tools associated with that. So that's what's happening at a high resolution model for these organizations. And we can share information on that to know that, okay, what do we know about collectively, this pattern, right? Is it associated with a certain ransomware gang? And what are their, what's their modus operandi? So it's not just some invisible enemy. It's actually connecting the dots back to what we know with these adversarial playbooks. So it's more of the playbook discussion piece. But from a technology framework in the CTA, we've actually created a platform that can handle that verbose data and share that, which is great. And that can actually be integrated into, SIM solutions, security stacks, things like that too.
Yeah, I like that because it enables teams to get better at finding those affiliates that you mentioned previously that are in one capacity providing the access into the network, right? I totally envision, like we do on a pen test, when it's the good guys breaking into the other good guys' systems, you're sitting back going, okay, I'm going to deploy this and see if it phones home. And once the attackers, the cyber criminals have that, that's what they're selling. If we can detect them at that stage before it gets passed off to another group that's going to do ransomware, probably the worst example for an organization, I think that sets us up for success if we can constantly iterate on that process. I think that's a good goal to have. It sounds like you both are working towards achieving that goal.
Yes, and what we would say, and to build on what Derek was saying is, and we want to do that part at automated speed, right? And we want to do that at scale. And that's what we've built inside the Cyber Threat Alliance to enable our members to do that and to do that as fast as they can move. And so certainly we want those providers that can share and consume that kind of technical data at that kind of scale. We definitely want them to be engaged in that discussion and in that sharing activity, because that is how we'll achieve that cadence that we need.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, Michael and Derek, for coming on Security Weekly today. For folks that want to learn more, you can visit securityweekly.com/Fortinet, learn about their products and how to be more involved with the Cyber Threat Alliance. Thank you both.
Thank you.